Queen Elizabeth II's coronation secrets behind the big day that thrilled Great Britain. 65 years ago this June, as her expectant subjects awaited breathlessly for her to become their new sovereign, the 27-year-old Princess Elizabeth was in fact having a profoundly uncomfortable time as she traveled from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Abbey. And things didn't improve once she got up close to the crown jewels inside. It might have been the perfect tonic for a post-war nation, but for the young woman at its heart it has now emerged that the first televised coronation on June 2, 1953, watched by millions around the world, presented certain personal challenges. Filmed for a new documentary, watching archive footage of her younger self traveling in the gold state coach on an unseasonally cold early summer's day, the Queen confesses that the lack of suspension in the gilded vehicle was a very real issue. "Horrible," she recalls. "It's only sprung on leather. Not very comfortable." Modern royal coaches, such as the Diamond Jubilee coach, have electric windows, heating and hydraulic stabilizers. Not so the state coach, which will be 258 years old this year. The interior may be lined with velvet and satin, but such materials apparently do little to cushion a monarch's posterior when the braces of the coach in question are slung with nothing more than inflexible animal hide. And the Queen is not the only passenger to have found it a bumpy experience. King William IV, a former naval officer who came to the throne in 1830, said it was like being on board a ship tossing in a rough sea. Queen Victoria, more generously upholstered than our present Queen, complained of the distressing oscillation of the cabin and often refused to ride in it, while the current Queen's father, George V, said that the journey to his coronation was one of the most uncomfortable rides I have ever had in my life. And the coach wasn't the only problem. The coronation crown also presented particular problems. There are some disadvantages to the crowns, but otherwise, they're quite important things, says the Queen. While a clip to promote the documentary does not specify what those disadvantages are, others have previously told of their heavy weight. The Queen has only once worn the St. Edward's crown, which was placed on her head at the moment of coronation, but as it weighs nearly 5 pounds it clearly made an unforgettable impression, in more ways than one. Destroyed after the English Civil War, this crown with an extraordinary history was remade for the coronation of Charles II in 1661. The original was thought to date back to the 11th century royal Saint Edward the Confessor, the last Anglo-Saxon king of England, but it was melted down in 1649 by the parliamentarians. And it wasn't just the weight of the crown on the young Queen's shoulders 3 centuries later. The hopes of a nation were also bearing down upon her as the country looked to her to lead them into a new era in the post-war years. It was, she says, the beginning of one's life really, as a sovereign. Viewing both private and official film footage, as well as the crown jewels themselves to mark the 65th anniversary of her coronation this summer, the documentary includes the Queen's personal and intimate insights into the remarkable working treasures that symbolize sovereignty and the monarch's link to the people. Kept under the watchful eye of the yeoman warders at the Tower of London, the coronation regalia are the most visited objects in Britain, and possibly the world. The cost of remaking the 11 principal pieces in the 17th century following the Civil War, including the coronation crown, state crown, orb, scepter, swords, spurs, ring and bracelets, was estimated at some £13,000, or as much as 3 fully equipped warships at that time. They are part of 140 items in total, which together contain no fewer than 23,000 precious stones. And it turns out that the Queen has her favorites. In the documentary she is seen identifying an apparent favorite gem in the form of the Black Prince's ruby, which adorns the imperial state crown, probably the best-known item among the crown jewels. Worn at the state opening of Parliament, this crown is also placed upon the new monarch's head at the conclusion of the coronation service, the main elements of which have remained largely unchanged for a millennium. Performed by the Archbishop of Canterbury, the ceremony sees the monarch anointed with holy oil and invested with regalia, including both crowns. "I've seen one coronation, and been the recipient in the other, which is pretty remarkable," muses the Queen as she recalls the day her 11-year-old self witnessed the coronation of her father in 1937. But she was clearly not amused by the antics of her own young children, Prince Charles and Princess Anne, who were aged just 4 and 2 on the day Mummy became queen. As she watches footage of the children playing with her robe at her coronation, the documentary's presenter Alistair Bruce of Cryenaic, 57, an army veteran and friend of the Queen whom she appointed as one of her heralds in 1988, remarks, "Such fun for the children." The Queen replies dryly, "Not what they're meant to do." The oldest item in the collection is the 11th century gold spoon used for the sovereign's ritual anointing with oil. It survived Oliver Cromwell's terrible meltdown in 1649, following the execution of Charles I, and was returned to Charles II by a member of the royal household who had purchased it for 16 shillings in a sell-off. Like the other items of regalia, it has its own traveling case tailored precisely to its dimensions. Late one afternoon in 1905, Frederick Wells, the manager of the premier diamond mine in Transvaal, South Africa, was alerted to a shiny object glittering in the wall of the mine. Thinking a practical joker had embedded a piece of glass, he scaled the wall and pulled out the biggest rough diamond ever found. The Cullinan, named after the chairman of the mine, weighed 3,106 carats, and 9 huge diamonds were eventually cut from it, including the largest in the world, the Great Star of Africa, which adorns the sovereign's scepter. The most famous diamond in the collection is also the most controversial, the Koh-i-Noor, which sits in the crown of the late Queen Elizabeth. Discovered in 15th century India, it was passed from ill-fated ruler to ruler, earning a reputation for bringing bad luck to men, including Shah Jahan, who built the Taj Mahal and was imprisoned by his son. It was named the following century by Persian conqueror Nader Shah, later murdered while asleep in his tent, who was said to have uttered Koh-i-Noor, or Mountain of Light, as it tumbled from the turban of his conquered enemy. Presented to Queen Victoria in 1849, both the Indian and Pakistani governments have requested the gem's return to its rightful country, but the British government has always politely declined. The coronation is on BBC One on January 14 at 8 p.m.